Have you ever wondered what was out there in the night sky? Stared up at the stars in the hopes of seeing something out of the ordinary? Have you ever heard unexplainable noises coming from a vacant room, or watched a shadow cross the wall in front of you? Have you asked yourself if there's life after this one, or if you had life before? What about strange creatures that are mythical and elusive? Have you experienced deja vu, or felt a prompting to leave because you felt you were in danger? What if tomorrow you were on the fringe?
Hey, this is Mark with What If Tomorrow and What If Tomorrow on the Fringe. Be sure to check out our website, whatiftomorrowmedia.com, and look at our cool merch. We've got t-shirts, hoodies, posters, and more. Our affiliates are Duke Cannon, EMP Shield, My Patriot Supply, and Conflicted the Game. Or check out buymeacoffee.com/whatiftomorrow and buy us a coffee. As always, be sure to like, comment, and share on both Facebook and YouTube. It helps get our content out to others and help our channel grow. Now on with the show. Hey folks, it's Mark with On the Fringe and our permanent part-time co-hosts, Sam and Jess. Phil is going to try to join us after soccer. So the soccer season won't last too much longer. We'll get everything back to normal, but excuse me, I didn't need that long. Tonight is going to be an interesting show. It's about time travel, Project Pegasus. With that, let's get started. So,
Who's starting?
Yeah, this is a crazy story. And if it's even a tenth of it can be proved to be true, it's earth-shattering stuff.
It is. That is very true.
Personally, before we get started, full disclosure, I'm going to butcher this guy's name. I apologize in advance, and I have not spent as many hours researching this as it deserved. I only spent about 6 to 8, and my goodness, what a ride. And also, full disclosure, if this technology was available to the public, I would absolutely abuse the hell out of it. Absolutely. I'm not going to lie.
Anyone would.
If this was made available to me, I would be a holy terror. Well, my mom says I was anyway, but I would still be. Now I'm old and it hurts me to fart.
TMI.
I mean, it is what it is.
So his name isn't that hard, Mark.
Well, I pronounce it Basiago, but I think it's
Basiago.
Basiago. Okay.
Basiago.
Basiago.
There you go.
Thank you very much. I mean,
we all know who he is. I think we were all going to pronounce it differently. So
he is. I mean, I've listened to the guy talk. He's very credible sounding, and the stories, they kept the ring of truth to him. I'm not gonna lie. A lot of people think the guy's off, but I don't think so. There's something there. There's something there.
Well, it all started back. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jess. Didn't he start talking about this in like 2004?
Yeah. 2004. Yeah. So I guess, well, I'll just get us rolling then. So before we can talk about Project Pegasus, we have to talk about Andrew Basiago. And if you want, let's just call him Andrew for the night.
Mr. B.
Yeah. Mr. And I'm going to put out, I'm personally going to put out a little disclaimer before I start in all of this. I spent many an hour listening to his interviews because unlike many of the other topics that we talk about on this show and others, this gentleman is still very much alive. This isn't an old history thing. This, if it did happen, and there's a very good chance it did, started out in the late 60s, early 70s. So it's not that long ago. And so my little disclaimer is I listened to many, many of his interviews, and he puts things so eloquently and easily. I actually dictated down many of his own thoughts and views, and I will often be reading exactly what he said verbatim. But I do not have the clout to sit here every time I bring up something. So
Agreed. I want to do this justice, but
if he
I'm not sure we've got enough time.
We don't.
Yeah.
There's
We don't.
so
No,
he's so prolific in interviewing and being, forthright with all the information that he has. It's
He's
amazing.
very charismatic as well.
Very charismatic, yeah, and very passionate about what he has to say.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
We keep saying,
yeah, so
go with it.
just know. It's okay. Yeah, just know that a lot of the things I will say from me personally are almost right out of his mouth sometimes. So there's that. I don't want to be accused of plagiarism or anything. So, so Andrew Bizago, he was and is still a Seattle attorney. Has lots of things under his belt. In 2004, like Pam said, he made a claim that at the age of 6, his father, who was in the CIA and numerous other projects, which I'll touch on, brought him to a DARPA-run time travel experiment that involved children. It was called Project Pegasus. This started right around the mid to late 60s and ran into the early 70s, and then maybe a little bit beyond that. No one really knows for sure.
Oh, it may still be running.
Yeah, he himself left in like 73, 74. I think he was like age 9-ish, somewhere around in there. He did get himself involved with a couple of more government projects later on, he said, but we're probably not going to be really touching on those. We're going to stick with the Pegasus project, at least tonight, because it's huge. We're going to go back to his father, because his father is the one that brought him into this. Andrew said that his family didn't actually know about any of this. It was just between him and his dad. So his father was a special projects engineer for the Parsons Company. The Parsons Company was the principal defense contractor assisting DARPA in its quest to achieve time travel. Prior to that, he was involved with the Tesla teleportation experiments at the Thomas Edison Research Labs in West Orange, New Jersey, where he was employed from 1956 to 1964. His father was hired by Parsons to be the point man between that company and the CIA. So DARPA, for those who may not know or don't know a whole lot about it, DARPA is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. And they were serving at that time as an umbrella organization for a multi-agency effort to pull all the sources that could eventually yield U.S. time-space exploration capability. Ancient sources like Egyptian, Babylonian, Sumerian civilization experiments with time travel, foreign technology sources like Nazi German and Soviet Russian. He says extraterrestrial sources, and also hidden works of contemporary inventors and physicists like Tesla and the Los Alamos scientists that created the atomic bomb. Okay, so there's just a little smidgen.
That seems like a likely group.
Yes. So Project Pegasus itself, like I said, mid to late 60s into the early 70s. It was a precursor, or said to be a precursor, to the Montauk Project. Yes. We don't have any time to go into that today, but if you want to go look it up, look up Montauk Project, Camp Hero, Montauk Air Force Base.
That'd be another excellent podcast to do.
It really would be.
That
Yeah.
and the Manhattan Project, because they're all somewhat tied.
Yeah. So for those of you listening who don't think Stranger Things, that's really what Stranger Things was based on, was Montauk Project and all of that. Kind of give you a little hint of what you're looking at there. So it was also supposedly a continuation of the time travel and teleportation trials started with the Philadelphia experiment from 1948. Something else that would make a fantastic show one day, but we don't have time to go into today. So this program, the Pegasus program, used children of government workers, mostly out of the CIA, to test their adaptability to handle the strains of moving between the past, present, and future. So apparently we already had transporters and different kinds of time machines available to the US government, and they were using them and had decided it was time to check it out and what would happen with the child. And actually Andrew's father already had assumed that it would be much easier on the children than an adult to handle the stresses that you go through in supposed time travel. Yeah. So
just emotionally, if nothing else, let alone physically.
Apparently at the time, the US government had 8 different time travel machines or ways to time travel, which I can get into here in just a minute. But the one that they use most often, or at least that Andrew used most often when he was there, was called a chronovisor. Now, some of you who listen to the show might recognize that name. We actually discussed a chronovisor on the time travel show that we did with the guys.
And we
this
discussed
isn't that
it when we had I just went blank, but we've discussed it several times.
Yeah, it's a big one. It wasn't that exact chronovisor. The chronovisor that we had discussed before is the one that's supposedly all locked up in the Vatican now and is used by the Vatican and shipped out to different countries to be used when they pay the right amount. You know, that whole conspiracy theory and all that. Yes. However, this chronovisor was actually developed supposedly through the US, but with the help of Father Arnetti, who was one of the original developers of the Vatican chronovisor. And interestingly enough, Andrew claims to have met him, that he was there the first day that they introduced Andrew to the chronovisor, that he was actually standing in the room with him and they introduced him. So if that really happened, ooh, exciting.
Yeah, and wasn't Enrico Fermi supposed to be involved with the creation of the chronovisor?
Yes, it was him and Father Arnetti. Really interesting stuff. Something else to go look up if you're interested in all the time travel stuff. Really interesting. So the main device. Well, actually, I guess I could go through all the different devices before we hit the main device. Let me move my paperwork. If I can find it.
Oh no, it's lost in the notebook.
Too many papers. You know how it is. Okay, so he calls it the 8 modalities of time travel within the U.S. government. And this is up to, I think, the mid-90s when he stopped doing his work with the U.S. government. This is what he knew up until then. So they had remote viewing, which we all actually know about. They've laid claim that they did use remote viewing, and they may still. Yeah. A spinning device, and that's literally what it was called. It was called the spinning device. And what it did was it literally was a machine that spun you, and it created this euphoria that would cause you to astral travel. Something they didn't use a lot of, and you can imagine why. I mean, how many times can you spin a kid?
Yeah, I would call that the vomit rocket.
Basically, yeah.
That's what would happen to me. I mean,
it was the late 60s, early 70s. We had tons of practice on the darn
tilt-a-whirl.
Yes.
Yeah,
Well,
I threw up on the Tilt-A-Whirl. That's why I call it a vomit comet.
And the
the
merry-go-round on
playground the merry-go-round. Yes.
Yeah.
The teacups killed me. I'm not going to lie. I am not a motion sickness. I get motion sickness. It's bad.
Yeah. I'm not a fan either. But yeah, I mean,
That does
Yeah.
not sound fun.
I couldn't count the times that I got flung around on one, and flew completely off more than once.
Oh my goodness.
That one's terrifying.
It is, and I'm sure that's why they didn't really use it a lot.
I'm sure.
So they
I'm
also
sure only one or two of the kids could probably handle it without keeping their lunch down.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Ugh. Next, they had the Montauk chair, which was a device that you could sit in and view aspects of your own future. A lot of these had kind of like a one-off thing. Now, one of the interesting things I found out about the Montauk chair, and this may be something we can touch on another show, but the Montauk chair itself is a little famous. Supposedly, it is simply a chair that was taken out of a crashed UFO.
Oh,
Yes.
And that's
I
how they
did see
found
that.
out. Yeah, that's how they found out that ETs or aliens ran and drove their own UFOs. You simply had to sit in the chair and think about your destination, and it would take you
Mhm.
there. And that's how UFOs were piloted.
I mean, that
Interesting.
checks. I mean, we're working on the same technology right now. Where did we get the idea?
Yeah.
Kind
I
of
mean, heck,
interesting.
they were talking about this in well, the 70s.
Yeah.
That was a big thing. They wanted to make, mentally controlled weapons. There was
Hmm. Well, they did
Mhm.
have. I mean, look at the weapons they had with the remote viewers.
oh yeah. Well, and now, I mean, they've got these visors that hook up to these fighter pilots. This is basically almost there.
Hmm.
So
It's true.
So,
Sorry.
no, it's fine.
so
We're
I'm
just
bad.
chit-chatting away.
Just smack me down.
Next is the chronovisor, and this is the machine that was used most often to send the kids this way and that. In fact, they called the children of the Project Pegasus chrononauts, basically training them up supposedly to use this as their means of travel when they got older, to do work for the US government, to be sent here and there.
So this was
So this
basically an improved version of the Vatican chronovisor.
It really was. I thought it was very interesting the way that Andrew described it. So it worked just like the chronovisor from the Vatican. It was basically a screen, and then you could view what was going to happen to you in your future, or what was going to happen someplace in the future. And that's how this one worked. But this one also had a situation where if you didn't want to stand back and look at it, you could actually walk up into the hologram itself and travel.
Yes.
So it was like a two-way one. Like you could stand back and view it, or you could actually get in it and go.
Sweet. I am
And
totally thinking about how to abuse that.
Oh, there's better
more
ones,
interest.
though.
Yeah, more interestingly, he also said that you actually had two different ways to show up if you went into the chronovisor. If you stayed for just a short time, you would be just a ghostly whisper wherever you popped up at. But the longer you stayed, the more solidified you became. And if you stayed there for quite a while, you could literally just walk around like anyone else. So it was like there's like 3 steps to it, depending on what you wanted
That
to
actually
to
sounds
do.
plausible.
Yeah.
I mean, why not?
So they had the Tesla teleporter, which we're going to discuss here in a little bit of detail in a minute. They had Stargate, which Andrew claims was not. They ended up calling, I don't know if everyone recalls, back in the early 80s, I think it was like 1983, 1984, the CIA had accidentally released some papers talking about Project Stargate, where they had done astral travel and stuff to Mars. That one got logged as Stargate. But Andrew says that Stargate was actually a Tesla transporter, only enlarged to the size of a basketball court.
Oh my!
It was to move large things or whole groups. Is what that was used for. And I didn't get to hear the whole story on why they ended up using Stargate as that, or how that got mixed up, or maybe it was used for both. I have no idea. The next one was a plasma confinement chamber. And this is one of those. I actually don't know a whole lot about it besides the fact that it basically zapped you across like on Star Trek in full.
Here's what I have on it. It says the plasma confinement chamber. In spring of 72, my father took me to a time lab in East Hanover, New Jersey, where under the direction of Dr. Sterling Colgate, I entered a lucite chamber where plasma was emitted. And while immersed in the plasma, I wormholed to Gettysburg, PA on November 19th, 1863, where I was depicted in the famous Josephine Cobb photograph of Abraham Lincoln at Gettysburg.
I actually have that photo.
That's how he traveled to get there.
Yes.
Yeah.
He traveled through the plasma confinement chamber
the photo actually, it's really grainy, but it actually looks a little bit like Andrew. I mean, you would expect a kid to look like a kind of adult version. Let me share that.
Yeah, he does say that some of the things that gave him away, made him look out of place then, was his haircut. He had a 70s bowl haircut. And his shoes,
were too big.
His shoes were too big.
Shoes were too big.
Yeah. I actually have the story on that. Let's see.
Yeah, I've seen him talk about that. That's actually a really interesting story.
Yeah. So he says, in the spring of 1972, I was sent to November 1863 to Gettysburg to see President Lincoln give his famous address. He was sent with a note to the Navy Secretary Gideon Wells to offer aid and assistance in the event that he was accidentally arrested, in case they got a hold of him for being in the wrong place. He later found out that he was captured in the famous photo from that day. The photo was donated, among other Civil War photos, to the Library of Congress. The photo was taken by Matthew Brady, a very prominent Civil War photographer. He was actually, the story's kind of hilarious. He was sitting on his front porch looking at a Life magazine when that photo popped up. It was in 1973. It was actually just a little after the summer where he had gone and done this, supposedly. He saw himself in the photo and ran and showed his sister. And she was like, it's just some kid from way back when, go away. So he ran and showed it to his dad, and his dad was reading the Sunday paper, and he said he looked over the paper and looked at the magazine and went, yep, that's you. Don't tell anybody. And just left it at that. Just
very
left it at that.
About it.
Now, he said he got into that shot was that he had actually been nearer Lincoln. Whenever Mark pulls up the photo, you're going to see that if you don't know the photo, it's actually very famous. Lincoln is actually very towards the back of the photo. There's a lot of people grouped up there that was listening to the address. And he had been near him, but had moved because he said his period costume looked funny to people there, along with the fact that they had put him in men's. Right, no, Lincoln's like off in the crowd.
Yeah, see, it looks like almost an American flag. He's closer to that.
Oh, right in here?
Yeah, no, he's way off. So he'd actually
to the other side. Like back
he's up there. He's up in there.
Yeah.
Up in the back.
At the top.
I see.
Yeah, he's way back there.
Yeah, so he'd been back there, but he felt like he was looking a little suspicious. He had the weird haircut. He didn't feel his period clothes were period enough, and he had on these gigantic men's boots that they given him because they didn't have a size small enough for him, and he felt really out of place, and he said people were giving him weird looks, so he decided to skedaddle and he worked his way around the crowd and had just started coming this way. And he claims that at this moment, he was actually starting to teleport back. He was starting to kind of dissolve a little bit. And he says that's why he looks a little fuzzy. Now, he says that two photo specialists named John Gannon and William B. Stillings studied and analyzed this photo, and claims that you can see part of his cheekbone and an eye socket if you zoom in on it with the proper stuff, and kind of shows that he was actually dissolving and heading back at that moment, because how could you see somebody's bone?
Interesting.
You know?
Well,
yeah. Unfortunately, all the photos, because we don't have access to the actual photo from the archives. We just have copies that have been copied a million times over. Every time you copy a photo, it gets worse. So if you zoom in on any of the copies that we can find floating around on the internet, it's just so grainy.
Oh, look at the one I've got on the background of the show here. It's terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's extremely grainy.
Yeah. Now here's this is a little Jess Fun nugget, or notebooks. I don't know if you noticed I changed my little name there. Because everybody who knows me knows that I love multidimensional theory and time travel theories and blah, 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 blah. So this was kind of a fun topic for me. And I'm going to stop right here. Andrew talks a lot about having, they let them in on a lot of information, future and that had happened before. And according to him, one of the reasons why he was sent back to Lincoln's address was because he had already been there, is what they told him. They were like, you're supposed to go. You've already been there. So we have to close the loop. And what they're talking about is retro causation. So it's kind of the closing of a loop that has already begun. He had already been there to have the picture taken of him. And so he had to go back and make sure that happened, because if he didn't, all manner of things could have gone awry. Unfortunately, yeah, I don't think he ever knew what the original intent was for him to have been there in the first place. But that particular incident, when he went back, and he said it happened lots of times, he was sent back. He kept just being told he had to be sent back because he was closing the loop.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, you know,
retrocausation.
Okay, so I just hit the National Archives, and I found a copy of that picture on their site. So I'm going to email it to you, Mark.
Okay.
Alrighty.
Well, while you're doing that, I'm going to finish up on the time travel machines.
Alrighty.
So we were talking about the plasma confinement chamber, which is how he traveled to get to Gettysburg. And the last one is the aeronautical repositioning chamber. Something sort of close to the plasma confinement chamber. Another one they didn't use a whole lot, but that's the main 8 that he at least knew about up until the mid 90s, when he dropped out of the government programs.
Well, you don't think
Right?
8's enough? I mean,
Well,
come on. I don't trust the government to deliver my mail. I do not trust them with a time machine. And I just have this feeling in my bones that it's real, and that they are jacking with stuff that they should not be jacking with. Because, you know, it's the CIA. Totally trustworthy.
yeah. So while they're getting that all pulled up, we're going to jog back to the teleportation device, the Tesla device, because this actually became one of Andrew's first, and also his main means of traveling back and forth to the places he had to work at with his father, because his mother and his brothers and sisters did not know about him being in this project. He often did a lot of work out of New Mexico, which we all know is very, very far away from New Jersey.
It is quite far.
Yeah. So, excuse me. Ooh, I got dry mouth. In 1968, age 6, Andrew made the first teleportation by a child in the U.S., he says. His father took him to the Curtis Wright Building, number 68 in Woodridge, New Jersey, where he stepped through the Tesla device for the first time. Now, the Tesla device that we are talking about is supposedly a machine that was that they kind of took over after Tesla died. I'm going to see if I can pull up all my information on that to get this right. After Tesla's death, one of the machines that he left behind was set up at Building 68 at Curtis Wright. It consisted of 2 elliptical-shaped booms between which a field of energy was broadcast. Tesla had listed it simply as an energetic array in his papers. The first man to try out the machine was a technician, and he actually did it accidentally. He simply walked between the booms to get through them, but stumbled and fell forward and vanished in front of the entire room full of people. He actually claims that he popped out in Africa. It took him 6 weeks to make his way back, and his advisor nearly passed out when he walked into the building after that 6 weeks, because it had been assumed that he had disintegrated. And they thought the machine was a killer machine.
That seems like a fairly valid assumption. I mean,
yeah, I mean, they go through and disappear.
I get that picture from.
How lucky is he that, I mean, not lucky because he ended up in Africa, but at the same time, lucky that he didn't end up on Mars or, somewhere
right? Space.
Crazy. Yeah. They would have never known. No one would know.
That's a lot clearer picture here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yes, it is. It's much clearer. Yeah. A little heads up. Yeah. A little heads up to everybody. The more you copy a photo, especially internet wise, the more it degrades every time. So,
especially if you save it as a JPEG.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It takes a little from it.
Yeah. So they've now realized that this machine is a transporter of some type. Now, how they went about figuring out all that is, I don't know the story behind that. We do know that Andrew's dad supposedly was one of the head engineers on that project, which is probably why he thought it was so safe for Andrew to use, because he brought him in when he was 6 to start using this machine. So supposedly he took his son's hand, and you had to jump. Apparently you had to jump through it. You had so many split second to so he grabbed his hand and they jumped through, and Andrew explained that it was he called it an energy tunnel in his head. He was like being whipped with energy. He said it was a bluish white color and it had holographic type walls. You're only in it for just a few seconds and then you're dropped off. He said it was a little scary because you're not dropped off with the people you came with. You kind of get scattered wherever you end up at, which is a little scary, especially for a 6-year-old. But he found his dad. Yeah.
That's horrifying.
His father didn't tell him where he was going, and he later found out that they actually had traveled 2,005 miles west to Santa Fe, New Mexico. Holy cow. They landed on the Capitol grounds and were picked up by a government car, and they were whisked away to nearby Los Alamos National Labs.
I would totally get rid of the airlines.
You think?
Yeah, maybe that's why they're not talking about it, because the airlines are a big source of income for America.
Yeah, well, look at the oil.
We build aircraft.
It's the same difference.
Trillions of dollars.
Andrew still thinks that they're using it for government officials. That's how the president can get to another country, not be jet lagged, do a full speech, and leave and come back and be refreshed and have a state dinner that night. So
that's reasonable.
What I think is interesting about that first jump is when they came back to New Jersey, they returned 7 minutes after they had left. So not only did they jump, they time traveled as well, because, and that's what you'll see later on too, is they would go for whole summers in New Mexico, he would stay with his dad and work and come back and only had been gone maybe overnight, you know, so they would still have the whole summer there. So no one, he said that no one ever knew he was gone for long periods of time because he wasn't. He was,
Yeah. He said he actually did the math on that once, and he said he figured he had about a year and a half extra added life to him, and his dad had 10 plus. He said you could actually tell on his dad. His dad was the same age as his mother, but at some point he started looking way, way older because he had so many extra years on him from the time travel.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
No, see, there's a bad side effect right there.
Yeah. Now, when he made this first trip and they took him to St. Alamos, the first person he got to meet was amazingly Dr. Harold Agnew. And Dr. Harold Agnew, for all you who don't know, was head of the Manhattan Project. Here, I wrote down a little bit about him so we could give a little bit. He was one of the principal physicists on the Manhattan projects. He was present at Alamogordo when the bomb was designed, built, and tested. He calibrated the magnitude of the Hiroshima blast following the Enola Gay and the chase plane called the Great Artiste. He became the director of LaMelle in 1970 when the Federal Science Administrator was secretly developing the time travel program in this timeline that we're talking about for DARPA. Andrew claims he was the full director of Project Pegasus and the U.S. time travel program at that time. So that's not under his actual listings. That's what Andrew has listed as.
I'm going to go a little bit off the rails here. How many times did this guy jump realities? You know, we've talked about this before. We feel like we've jumped a couple times. Fortunately, we all seem to arrive together. How many times do you think this guy jumped? I mean, is he even in his original reality now?
It's hard to tell.
I feel like I'm not.
Hard to tell.
So
I think that's right there. You've pinpointed the mess that this is. If any of it is true, any of it at all, what a mess. I can't even imagine trying to sort out.
Did he come back to the same parents? I mean, this is
if he traveled with his father, he most likely came back with his father, but who knows if the rest of his family.
This is a total brain.
But he didn't always travel with his father. When he got older and he started doing the Mars project and stuff, he wasn't with him at all. So if that's true, I don't know.
Oh my goodness.
Enzo has a good point. Any time travel creates a new timeline. Even if you don't interact with anyone or anything, it's a new timeline. That's a good point.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on. Let's keep going because we have a lot to get through. What does he say?
What if Amazon already has it?
Bezos
is rich. He could make it happen.
So one of the other, he was sent to a numerous famous historical things. He was sent back to Ford's Theater when Lincoln was shot. In fact, he said he was sent back there like 7 or 8 times, all from different angles. And at this point, he actually talks about that he got sent back on different lines to come at it from a different viewpoint. And what exactly that means is anybody's guess. Does that mean different viewpoint as in different lines had different ways that he was killed, different times that he was killed, different ways he was killed? Or
that sounds like they were intentionally putting him in different timelines.
Yeah. They actually did it too many times, and he said twice he ran into himself, which was a bad deal.
Yeah, that sounds catastrophic.
Yeah. So that's crazy.
Everything I've ever heard about it, you can't, I mean, if you run into yourself, that's like, doesn't that cause like a massive, I mean,
I think that's if you run into your actual self from that timeline.
So, oh well, that makes
He was running into
that makes
him
sense.
that makes
himself.
sense, does it?
Yeah.
From different
He was
timelines.
bumping
Yeah.
he was bumping into his time traveler self. So I
As
don't know
opposed to
what that would
himself in
do.
that
Well, I
particular
mean,
time.
yeah, I guess that would be fair enough. Fair
I
enough.
don't know though, because at the same time they talk about later on that they would jump into their future selves, their future timelines too. So
That's
I don't know.
crazy.
Interesting.
Hey,
It hurts my
Enzo has
brain.
a comment on here.
Okay.
He says, "I'm sure all these methods require a ridiculous amount of power to operate."
Like
Enzo,
CERN.
I'm not so sure because we've discussed it on the show before. Time slips and dimensional slips seem to happen accidentally on a fairly regular basis. So it's my belief that it probably takes a whole lot less power than you think if you can figure out
Yeah.
the wherewithal that creates it. I think it's easier to
Actually,
travel between realities than it is between planets.
I actually have a recipe for a time travel that Bizago gives everybody, like his dad's own patent. So
Oh, nice.
we could talk
Cool.
about
I'm gonna
that here
try
in a
it.
little bit. It doesn't take much energy at all to do it. Okay, so we were talking about famous places and famous things that he did. There was a lot of them. I didn't write them all down because it would just be sitting here regurgitating historical times or whatever. The one I found that was the most interesting, though, wasn't even the Gettysburg thing. It was George Washington's encampment. Bijago claims that he was sent back to the encampment in Brooklyn Heights above New York Harbor with a message from the Nixon administration to Washington, asking that he retreat his troops from New York Harbor. He says that Washington believed he and the other boys sent with him on this job were angels. And they persuaded him by showing him two-dimensional holograms of an eagle landing on a red, white, and blue shield with arrows, and said, surely, General Washington, this could not be an artifact from your time. It has to come from the future. And Washington had said back, I most agree. In fact, this is something I'd like to show Ben Franklin. It's fascinating. I will retreat my troops immediately. So this is another one of those causal loops that he and some of the other boys were sent back to close.
So an eagle holding arrows on a shield, like is on the dollar bill or is on currency?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. So I just thought that one was a kind of just an interesting aside that, he had a full-on conversation with Washington and
I would
may have been helpful in pulling those troops out so they weren't massacred. So
Yeah,
you know what's interesting about all this? Look at out-of-place artifacts like the cell phone that was found was it in a Chinese tomb or a Chinese grave or something? I can't remember the specifics on it. I just remember
mock-up,
the cell phone found.
It was
there was an actual.
Was there?
There was a cell phone and there was a watch.
I remember the watch.
Yeah.
Maybe
a little Swiss number that you wore as a ring.
Yes.
I think they did find something like a cell phone or something in one not that long ago. I mean, it was a while back, but
probably in the
they
last
had just
they found it.
They had just cracked it open and they found it back behind some old jars or something like that.
Yes,
I can't remember.
yes.
But
Yep,
yeah.
that's it.
Regardless, that might be an explanation. Kids dropping
What if they
crap.
dropped it? What if they ran there and they dropped it? They're like, holy crap, where'd it go?
I mean, I can see that. My kid I had 3 cell phones. They were identical. And he would lose one. And we would find one. And we would transfer the service to that phone until he lost it and then transfer it to one of the other phones. There was a never ending cycle because he lost one like every other week. I knew the gal's name at the phone company. Yeah, but he lost it again.
Enzo said, oh, an old Nokia style phone. Yes, that's what it was.
They last forever.
One like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So
There's
He is
actually
doing-
a painting of Washington talking to the angels around Washington too. And didn't he say one of them that resembles a small boy he felt was him?
Mhm.
I mean,
Who knows?
if you'd been there, that would be a fair assumption. I mean,
Yeah. So does that
Yeah.
mean that maybe he didn't come through? Maybe he was in like, you know how there's the 3 stages where you could go through? Maybe he came through as a more ghostly stage.
Maybe
For them to
he
think
could
that.
I don't know. That's crazy.
It is
I'd love to
No.
pick this guy's brain sometime.
I know.
They say he's incredibly smart, which is another aspect of the Pegasus program. So within the Pegasus program, they also had the Galileo program, and the Galileo program was basically a teaching program to teach these kids how. First, they taught them to speed read, and then they set them up on this program. And I could not find the actual name of the machine. Bajago kept saying it, but he said it so quickly I couldn't actually pick up what he was saying every time he said it. But it was this machine that would literally flash these images of pages or items or illustrations at you at top speed, and it would somehow ingrain in your head better than actually just reading a textbook.
Like a subliminal message.
Exactly. And they all got so fantastic at it. He said that every child that was in that program ended up becoming the most esteemed academics of their generation. He himself went to multiple colleges and did multiple things, got multiple awards. And he said they were all like that. And sadly enough, he claims that these machines were given to the public school systems at the time. And some schools had them clear up until the 90s, but they were not utilized because the teachers and stuff kind of saw them as hokum. They were like, why are we going to invest any time in this ridiculousness when we have actual work to do? And they just ended up collecting dust. And Bijago had said that, I guess, a nearby school district, or the one that he had attended for a while, he asked the principal there, what had happened to those machines. And he was like, I think this was like in 2000. And he said, oh, we threw those away last year. They were just collecting dust in the back and we finally got rid of them.
Here's the word. It's like a tachystoscope.
Oh. See, that's why I
couldn't. Yeah.
I'm going to butcher that. I'm not even going to try.
That's what it's called. It says the training included photo learning on machines called tachystoscopes, developed by the Office of Naval Research for Education of the 140 gifted and talented American school children enrolled in the Project Pegasus and other secret defense and intelligence projects utilizing U.S. school children as team members. And it was called Galileo. It emphasized the history of society and the science from the year 1450. The purpose of the schooling was to give the children who would be time traveling for DARPA knowledge of the social and technical history of the modern era so that we would have this information available to us while we were in the field. So yeah, they like pumped them full of this information just in flashes, basically. So it would ingrain in the brain.
Yeah. He also said it taught them. Yeah. He also said that it taught them all the history, the history of all the time machines they were using, how they were made, and how to use them exactly. So they didn't have to be taught later. They could literally just be, they'd be like, just go.
They're basically downloading to their brains in a very fast fashion.
Yeah. And if he was correct and said that a lot of these were sent out to actual normal school districts to be utilized and used, and they were just dumped in an old room somewhere, can you imagine what we've lost out on if those actually worked?
I want one. I want
one too. Do you imagine how easy it would be do you know how easy it would be to research all of this if we had one of those machines?
That would be so fantastic.
If somebody out there knows where one of these machines is, I want it. I want it. If you're gonna throw it out, I'll take it.
We could put out 2 shows a day.
2 shows an hour. We'll just
30 years in a year.
I'd be like,
I don't know.
Okay,
my brain might explode though.
No, I'd be like, all right, download me with Project Pegasus. Go. Just let it.
I
Be
mean,
like Wayne and Garth.
we're laughing, but there's solid science behind that. I mean, I've read articles about, using those sort of techniques. If they perfected it, it's a damn shame that they got all thrown out.
Enzo said, according to Google, there's tachystoscopes apps that are out there. Interesting.
Might have to give that a try.
Oh
Yeah.
shit! Put it on my phone. I want to learn Japanese today.
Now,
Chinese
all
tomorrow.
of this, all of this is
Russian
gonna be
the
fun.
day after.
But apparently, there were accidents that happened.
Oh no!
So
Well,
not all the kids made it out okay. Some of
now
them had
that's not good.
some. Yeah. The worst one that I found was Andrew. We'll go back to Andrew since we all have trouble with the last name. Claims that there was a child named Kevin, and he refuses to give out his last name because this gentleman is still around and alive too. Made a teleport and lost his feet. Unfortunately.
Oh.
Yeah, not good. Not good.
Like that. Yeah.
Teleported into a solid object.
Oh.
No, what happened? And I wrote it down verbatim what he said. Yeah, so this is kind of horror story kind of stuff. So here we go. The boy arrived in a fountain or a water basin of some sort with about 3 inches of standing water in it. The specific gravity of the water was such that his feet and everything above the middle of his ankles arrived at different times, and as a result, they were severed. He toppled out with his feet and his sneakers still in the basin.
Oh my God.
Bizago ran up to the basin where the kid was laying and was screaming, "Where's my feet? I'm only 9 years old. What am I going to do without my feet?" And Andrew said the last time he saw him, they had given him prosthetic feet. So there was no way to fix that.
That is horrible.
Yeah. And unfortunately, they call it, some of them call it chrononaut illness. So all of the kids that came out of that didn't come out. None of them came out completely okay. So he said all of the original children of the program reportedly suffer from several shared ailments. Andrew suffers from kidney failure. He's nearly blind. As of 2019, he had 6 different operations to save what little bit of eyesight he had at the time. And he has an illness, and so does the rest of them, that mimics diabetes, but resists regular diabetic treatments. He was actually warned in 2003 by a former CIA man involved with Pegasus that all of the chrononauts had it.
So it's a side effect of the travel.
Of the traveling. Yeah.
Dang.
And they can't fix it. Can you imagine that?
No.
He was actually making huge complaints. He was like, every time I went into the doctor and told them this, that he had been warned that he had something that looked like diabetes but would not react to the medications. His doctor would just crack open a case book on how to deal with, mentally ill people. How do I diagnose this mental case?
Okay, I have a question. Quick. We lost Mark. Mark is the host. How does he get back in here?
He can get himself back in. He runs the board.
Can he? I know, but can he get into this particular stream?
Yeah, he's the one running it.
Okay.
I'm back.
Right there.
Okay. Yay! I was like, okay, is he going to be able to get back in here?
Yeah, he's running it.
I lost both of my internet.
Oh no.
Connections. So
we're glad you're back.
I switched over to the cell phone connection, and I'm back.
Phew. We would have just kept going. No, we did stop and say, wait a minute. Is Mark going to make it back?
Maybe.
That is horrible.
Maybe I teleported.
Yeah.
Maybe so.
Maybe.
Good. Well, you teleported out and back in.
I would totally abuse it. I am not even kidding.
We would be jumping all over the place.
Fort Knox.
So The last big thing that I'm going to talk about before I let this go to Pam, because Pam actually took a different route on some of this than I did, and she has a lot of information that I don't. But I'm going to do this last little part because it really is going to lead in on what she's going to talk about. So, what was the point of all of this time travel with these kids? So, what was the intel that was getting gathered? So, Andrew had said the info gathered on these travels were given over to the CIA by agents with DARPA. Future events were being reported too. Andrew reported hearing about 9/11 30 years before it happened. He claims to have seen footage of the plane hitting the second tower. The program was constructed not to change history, but to gather intelligence about it. Since 1970, the U.S. executive branch, the military, and the intelligence community, as a result of the time travel technologies that were developed during Project Pegasus, have been operating in a non-linear basis. So basically what this is saying is they have found out what's going to happen before it happens. They know what they need to do after it happens. They've gone back in time and not fixed things, but did cleanup work after something had happened. So the government, if what he's saying is true, our government is working in a reactive, non-reactive way, kind of fixing and picking what needs to be done, and that they can't actually change our history, but they can certainly do a cleanup in a way that makes things that happens afterwards a little bit nicer for everybody.
It's almost like there's
or
points that can't be changed. It's kind of like a Doctor Who thing. You don't know Doctor Who though, but yeah, there's there's points in history that are fixed that you cannot change. That's kind of what it sounds like.
Is this somehow related to the Looking Glass project?
Yeah, and that's something else that we can't go into right now because that's too big.
There's another one you can add to the list.
Yeah, but before I let Pam take over here, because she's going to kind of take over from that route, I do believe. I found a really good example of what he was talking about, and this is straight from his mouth too. I thought it was just super interesting. If it's true at all, it's super interesting. He said, the government has been operating on this non-linear basis. For example, when Andrew Card whispered in George Bush's ear at the M&T Booker Elementary School in Florida that the attacks on the Twin Towers and the Pentagon had begun, it wouldn't have been, or he wouldn't have said, "Mr. President, we are under attack." It would have been something like, "Mr. President, the long-seen 9/11 scenario is now unfolding. The missing piece, the missing element that has been held back from our Americans that would enable them to understand how our government is actually operating on its highest levels and some of the mystery of prior knowledge of 9/11 is not because 9/11 was an inside job, but because the presidency, the intelligence community, and other alphabet agencies, and ultimately the military, have been operating on this nonlinear basis for 46 years. Mm-hmm. So he's saying that if what he's saying is true, President Bush would have already known about 9/11, but he wouldn't have known if it was actually going to happen or not. It was one of the scenarios that could play out that day.
Yeah.
And in one timeline or another.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And he was being told which one was playing out. So he would have been told beforehand, okay, this day, these things can play out. And
I'm losing you guys again.
Oh no. It's Jess. We're here. We're losing Jess.
It must be the backbone provider to town here. Mine cleared up as soon as I went to my cell phone.
Did it? Are you back?
So I'm gonna let Pam take over. I am back, I think. Am I back?
Yay.
You're back.
I think you're back.
Okay.
Sort of.
Okay. I'm gonna go check my internet hookup while you get started. I'll be right back.
Sounds fabulous. Okay. So there's a few things I want to touch on, and then I'll go into what I found. One thing, a lot of this is going back to Tesla's technology and the fact that when Tesla died, his apartment was raided basically, and all of his things were taken, all of his papers and all of his
Within hours.
Yeah, within hours. When his nephew went to gather things up, it was gone. And he was told he couldn't have it. They didn't have it. So he could not get it back. And one of the claims on Tesla was that the last 15 years of his life, his last 15 years that he was purportedly raising these pigeons, he was actually secretly working on teleportation. That makes a lot more sense than him just raising pigeons, honestly, because of who he was.
Yeah. Now, just as a side note, most of Tesla's papers have ended up at the Tesla Museum, but there is a large section of them that are gone.
That are missing completely.
Yes.
Yes.
Several chests. I don't remember how many.
I'm going through to hit on stuff that I had that wasn't in there. Yeah, and they do say that it was Tesla was his cover up was perpetuated by Tesla himself to protect the technology. He didn't want it to get out. It's kind of like the death ray that they thought he had. He didn't want that out either.
I wouldn't want that out either. I wouldn't trust anybody with that.
For sure not. And
I think the teleportation is probably more dangerous than the death ray because
it's yes.
I know I would use the reason I say this is because I would totally use the teleporter. I would not use the death ray.
Yeah, for sure.
I might use the death ray.
Well, I mean, I have a list. We're not going to go into
that. Okay, and then probably the most interesting thing that I ran across was an affidavit of Andrew Bazaglio that was given before the Vancouver 9/11 tribunal. And this is dated from 2015. And it is in regards to prior knowledge of the terror attacks of September 11th, 2001 by Defense Secretary Donald H. Rumsfeld, resulting from the quantum access capabilities of the U.S. defense technical community acquired when Secretary Rumsfeld served secretly as the defense attaché to DARPA's Project Pegasus in the early 70s. And basically what Andrew was trying to do with this affidavit was say, hey, look, we knew about this. These people knew about it. They chose not to do anything about it. And the public has a right to know. He wanted to whistleblow on all of this. So what he does in this affidavit, it's like 10 pages long. I'm not going to hit everything, but I am going to highlight some stuff. Jess did hit a lot of it that's in here. The first page, he basically goes through saying who he is. And remember, this guy's an attorney, so he's very, very good at these. When it gets to line 12, it says, during the years of 68 to 72, I was a child chrononaut in Project Pegasus. A chrononaut is a time traveler. DARPA is the agency that develops advanced weapon systems, communication devices, and surveillance technologies for the U.S. Department of Defense. And then he goes on to say in line 18, or I guess line 17, quantum access is the ability to gather information on a non-local event in the space-time continuum by either sending a chrononaut there physically or propagating a hologram of the event through which the chrononaut either views the event or visits the event on a physio-virtual basis. And then he goes on to say non-local events are those scenarios which take place in what we call the past and the future, but which are actually going on simultaneously in a quantum hologram that consists of a multitude of adjacent, similar, and dissimilar timelines. He states the mission of Project Pegasus was to use quantum access to develop a remote sensing and time capability pertaining to the non-local events on behalf of the executive branch of the United States government. He says these time travel technologies were advanced electromagnetic devices, including teleporters that would enable DARPA to send the chrononauts to the non-local events. So we kind of start getting into let's see, not quite, I guess. A chronovisor is an electro-optical device that's driving an electromagnetic signal through a crystal array, which propagates a hologram that lenses a non-local event into the lab. So this was basically, you were putting a telescope in and shooting a hologram right into the room, which is really cool. And then he goes on down on like line 34. I was first brought into Pegasus by my father, 67, 68. He talks about his first jump. And that it resulted in him becoming the first American child to teleport. Let's see here. If we already covered it, I'm skipping it.
Now, do you think the Russians were doing this too?
I don't think they were, because I don't think they had Tesla's technology.
Well, now
they may do something
Andrew
similar.
Did talk about. Yeah, Andrew had talked about, and I remember I was talking about when about DARPA itself, that DARPA was collecting from Russian, Soviet, and Nazi German intel on stuff that they were already using and combining
so
it
they were doing something
using it
different.
Yeah, but they were collecting that intel on how they were doing it too, and probably using it or developing it into something different. So, and then you can go back into that. That's like Nazi Bell, and all that, that insanity, which we've talked about before too.
And look at their remote viewing program that they had, their psychic spy program.
The Russians were doing that.
They were doing it before we were. We based our program off of what intel we got off of their program.
Yeah.
Anybody remember the TV show from the 90s, 7 Days?
I don't.
I don't.
I don't either. But I'm going to look it up.
Yeah, for sure. Then he goes on to talk about the 8 things, like Jess was talking about, the 8 different forms of quantum access for DARPA. And he goes through all of those forms. And he talks about, let's see, line 50, during the 3 years that I was officially attached to Project Pegasus from 69 to 72, I spent 3 secret summers in New Mexico living with my father and taking part in time travel activities undertaken at both atomic research institutions like Los Alamos National Labs and the Sandia National Laboratory, and smaller labs operated by DARPA in the desolate environs of New Mexico. These secret summers were effectuated by my father and I teleporting to New Mexico, spending the summer there, and then by the end of the summers, teleporting back to New Jersey so as to arrive on the afternoon of the morning we had left at the beginning of the summer. So he was really only gone an afternoon in New Jersey when he actually spent the entire summer. In this way, the time loop created by our quantum displacement in New Mexico was closed, and time travel was used to conceal time travel research via the propagation of a time loop and its subsequent disappearance. So they always, like Jess was pointing out earlier, they always had to go back and neatly tie up that loop to make sure that it was closed.
For God's sake, don't let anybody's employers get a hold of this stuff.
No kidding, right?
They will send us on vacation and have us back that afternoon.
He talks about these secret or hidden summers were the first summer 71, summer 73, accessed from fall 71, and the first summer of 72. I say first summer 71 and 72 because after those summers, my father and I lived second summers with a different set of experiences upon returning to New Jersey. That's pretty wild, I think.
It's crazy. And I'm just going to note really fast, we were talking about this backstage before we started the show, but he actually discussed the fact that he calculated and figured he had about a year and a half extra age on him from these summers, and that his dad had 10 plus years, and it happened much earlier to his dad, and his mother and father were the same age, but said about the time he hit midlife, his father looked a good 10 years older than his mother already, just from this gained age from these added summers and work lengths that his father would take. I'm sure he took some without his son.
I'm sure. Yeah.
I'm
For
sure.
So I can't imagine, you know.
Both before and after
Wow.
Andrew was
Yeah.
involved in the project.
Yeah. Here's an interesting question for you. I wonder, so like I'm a mother, and I recognized when I was, like when my daughter was younger, she would leave for like a week to go have vacation with friends or family and come back, and I would notice the week of age she had put on, because kids change quickly. And everybody knows when you leave, like in elementary school, and you leave for the summer and then you come back from the summer and everybody is completely changed.
Yep.
How did that look to his mother if he would leave and age an
Well, she
entire
probably
summer's
noticed.
time?
I mean, we'd have to ask him.
That is
And
a good question.
To her,
Would it be like,
to
man,
her,
you guys
he
must
was
really spent a lot of time out in the sun?
well, I mean, but like to her, sometimes he had only been gone for half an hour or an hour.
Yeah.
But he would have aged an entire summer's worth.
Summer. Mm-hmm.
I don't
So
know
did
how
they
they got
have to-
away with it.
I don't either, because did they have to take pains to make sure that his hair was exactly the same length when he got back, the same haircut?
Oh,
Maybe she
What
was-
if he had a scraped knee?
Maybe she was
He came back and he
partly,
didn't have one.
Maybe she was
I
partly
don't know.
in. They told her something was going on and not to ask.
She wasn't. He said that she did not know anything. His father died in 90 something.
Uh-huh.
Well, there goes
And
that theory.
his father requested, which he thought was he was like he was at odds with himself, because for his entire life his father always ingrained in him, no one is to ever know. You do not tell your mother, you do not tell your sisters and brothers. This is between you and me. You never ever tell anybody. And then on his deathbed, he was like, son, it's up to you. You have to get this out to everybody so everybody can know. And it took him like another 10 years before he even had the gumption to start doing something about it. And he did say that he finally told his mother and his siblings what had happened. And of course, they didn't believe him for a very long time. And I think he said it was one of his brothers that finally was the first one to step up and say, hey, what you've been saying now makes sense. Those times that you left with dad and then you came back and things didn't seem quite right.
You were 2 inches taller.
I believe you.
Yeah. And think about it. I mean, even if they got to where they were, they changed clothes, so he would come back in the same clothes that he left the house in. What if he had a growth spurt? What if his shoes didn't fit? What if his shirt was too short?
Yeah. That's what I was wondering. Like that's
Crazy.
How do you can't get that past a mama.
No. Be able to sniff that out like nobody's business.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So I don't know.
They should have put us in charge.
Just something to think about.
Either that or they had one of the little flash
Like I said,
like on Men in Black.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is true or not. It just listening to the guy, he's so convincing.
Mm-hmm.
And the behavior he attributes to the government checks. I mean, this is the sort of thing that they would do. So whether you believe it or not, I think it's worth the research. I think our listeners need to go look this up for themselves. Listen to the guy. It's well worth listening to, because I think there's something to it. But that's just my gut feeling.
Yeah, there's got to be something to it. There is so much information out where it's just him doing interviews, especially podcasts that are just devoted to it. They're like 9-part podcasts. They're like 3 and 4 hours long a piece, where it's just him relaying all this information, and it's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the guy's more believable than a lot of the guys I work with. I mean,
yeah, he sticks to the story. He truly does. It doesn't. There's really no. Now, if you got there, you will see people. If it's not him particularly talking, we were talking about this before we came on too. There's some that you run across and they've got the story completely mixed up. So you have to be careful if you're listening to anybody recount the story other than Andrew himself, because a lot of times the the information is not being given correctly.
Yeah. A really good place to go for that, everybody that's listening. I found a podcast called Open Loops, and they do a lot of this type of story. And they had Andrew on himself for 4 shows in a series. It's called Open Loops, and these 4 pieces were done back in June 2021. So if you go back through their full archives are free. You can go back through their archives and find those series of 4. And he really goes in depth on the entire story from the beginning, the time when he was little, clear up until now. Whether it's real or not, he is a fascinating person. And there's just a little bit too much truth bleeding into his story for me to think that there isn't something to it.
That's how I felt about it. I mean, when you read about these things,
my gut tells me there's something to it.
Well, when you're just reading about it, it's like, man, this seems wild and way out there. But then you listen to him talk, and he is extremely passionate about the subject. He sticks with he's credible. I mean, he sticks with the story. It's not changing every time he talks, or even every 10th time he talks. It's the same story and the same set of facts over and over and over. Mm-hmm. And I think that more than anything, really what makes it fascinating. But let me finish this up really quick on this affidavit. He did talk about the fact that he met several future national leaders of the United States at lunches that were held in Albuquerque, New Mexico, with project principals shortly after they were apprised of the fact that using its quantum access capability, DARPA had determined that they were destined to serve as president or vice president of the United States. These individuals included President H.W. Bush, Vice President Richard B. Cheney, President George W. Bush, and President William J. Clinton. These lunches were held at La Hacienda restaurant in Old Town Albuquerque, where my father's lifelong friend, Mary Constance Chavez, was the cashier. And then he went on over here on 60, line 60. Future events, developments, and conditions that I acquire prior knowledge of as a result of serving as a child on Project Pegasus included, but were not limited to, the resignation of President Richard M. Nixon, the advent of the internet, the emergence of AIDS as an epidemic disease, the presidencies of U.S. Presidents Carter, Bush, Clinton, and Bush, widespread cell phone use in the future, the fact that Donald H. Rumsfeld would one day serve as defense secretary, and the attack on the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center on 9/11. And then he goes on to say, I'm filing this because I have direct personal knowledge of the fact that a secret time travel project for which he served as defense attaché gave Donald H. Rumsfeld, who served as U.S. Secretary of Defense during 9/11, prior knowledge of it 30 years before it. And let me see if I marked anything else. Those were the big things. The 9/11 event was spoken of openly within Project Pegasus's inner circle. I think it was the case because not only was it a future event that had been detected by the program, but because it was a dramatic future event. It was a future event that had implications for the national security of the United States, and it was a future event that involved something that had not been seen since the War of 1812, which was a coordinated attack on the U.S. mainland. Those were the highlights on that affidavit. It's a fascinating read, and I will see if I can get a copy of it over to you, Mark. So,
all right, we'll get it up on
on your website or on the Facebook page.
On the presidents. I did see in another article where he'd given an interview. Bajago said that while no one he had not seen where Trump would ever become president because he didn't get to see up that far. He said he did remember that back in the 90s, before his father passed away, his father and him were watching TV and Trump was on there for something. And his dad leaned over and said, that Trump fellow, you keep his eyes on him. I've gotten to see some of his stuff. So Vijago thought that was probably his dad's way of saying, hey, he's going to be president without saying it. His father had seen it.
Just letting him know
he
had something. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, something big coming up.
He did go back and say, when he was asked why did nobody intervene, and this is not part of his affidavit, this came from somewhere else. He said it was the consensus of the U.S. officials administrating Project Pegasus that information about future events should be used to engage in a contingency planning for future events, but not to play God and change the future by preventing or altering future events. And that a paradox exists such that acting to change future events based on prior knowledge of them results in diminished accurate knowledge of future events. So there is an institutional reluctance to change future events based upon prior knowledge of them because of the impact of doing so on the quality of intelligence database concerning other future events. So basically, butterfly effect. You mess with one thing, it's going to have a ripple effect.
Yeah.
And so
it's kind of the grandfather clause.
Yes. Yeah.
And when we were looking into the Looking Glass project, the futures would play, and whenever they tried to change something, it never worked out the way they thought.
Mm-hmm.
So they stopped. So maybe that has something to do with it.
Well, there's also the thought that no matter what you change, it's the line's always going to write itself, So it basically wouldn't matter what you did. No matter what you do, the line will write itself eventually somewhere down the line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff. Those are the biggies I had.
So one of the last things here I thought was really interesting. Andrew Vijago has been saying for years now that time travel is so easy to do. He has been purposely leaving Easter eggs every time he does an interview or does a story, trying to get anybody to create this. He says it's super easy. He said when he was little, he had asked his dad how the chronovisor worked. And his dad had said, it's pretty simple, son. He said, all we are doing is sending an EM signal, an electromagnetic signal, through an 8-sided bismuth crystal. And it creates this little hologram that pops up. He said, anyone can accomplish this, a small holographic piece this way. And he said he's been doing this for a while, but he said just a few years ago, a British researcher named William Keats actually found an old patent from 1967 involving an 8-sided bismuth crystal that was granted to a physicist called Leo Osaki. And his own father was listed among the contributors to the patent. So it was kind of a full circle. He was, and this is one of his proofs, if you want to discount me, go and look. This is in the National Archives. This is a patent with my father's name on it with the bismuth crystals.
That's cool.
But he was just like, somebody, please do this. He was like, find a bismuth crystal, some EM, some EM, and he was like, play around with it on your desk and create that little hologram. He goes, I can't promise you that the government will come and arrest you because they'll probably know the minute you do it. But somebody try. He was like, I've been leaving these Easter eggs for years and nobody's tried it yet. So,
something else that did come
came and arrested them.
Something else that did come up that can be verified is the fact that when on his very first jump, when they jumped into Santa Fe, but they didn't return through Santa Fe, they went to another town in New Mexico. It escapes me right now where it was. But he said the reason they didn't jump back through Santa Fe was because it was infiltrated by the KGB. And that is accurate. You can confirm that particular office in Santa Fe at that time was infiltrated by the KGB.
Yeah.
So, kind of cool.
Damn Soviets.
Oh, hey, Enzo.
I do.
Enzo.
One thing. Go ahead.
I was going to say, Enzo asked a question a while ago. I just saw it pop up on my screen down here. He was talking about the Tunguska explosion back in the early 1900s. They did think one of the theories is that it was caused by one of Tesla's rays. It's one of the theories. He was asking about that. I don't know the full story on it. That might be an interesting story to do later.
Yeah, I actually watched a video on YouTube about that within the last few weeks. So I'll see if I can't find that and post it someplace.
Yeah.
Now,
sorry to interrupt you. I saw that pop up.
I don't think, have we talked about the fact that he actually did run for president in 2016?
We have not, because that's one of the weirder things.
It is.
He did. He was told when he was little, in fact, by that lady that you were, what was her name? I can't even remember her name. Chavez.
Oh yeah. His father.
They would let these kids see little bits of their future in the Montauk chair, and they would show them little bits of what their future was. Somebody had brought back a book that he was going to write later on, and he got to see a few pages of it. It was kind of like an encouragement, like keep on going because you're going to get to write about this later. But they also told him that he was going to end up being vice president or president at some point between 2016 2028.
Yes.
And he did run for president, or he started the process back in 2016. Of course, everybody knows
he ran.
That didn't happen.
Yeah, he ran.
He
did run. He didn't make very far.
No, he didn't.
He
mainly because the minute he started running,
it said if successful, he would have been the first time whistleblower in the White House, time-traveling conspiracy theorist running for president. His policy proposals included ending homelessness in America, ending chemtrail spraying in the U.S., protecting the Sasquatch species, as he claimed to have encountered one in 1966. He said that the matrilineal DNA is that of human, and patrilineal DNA is from an unknown primate on Sasquatch. They should be put on the endangered species list, was his campaign. And the fourth and final policy he ran on was disclosing secret advanced technologies. They might be socially, economically, or technically disruptive in nature. And so that was his big thing. And he wanted to really push the fact that their teleportation from DARPA was happening and that there are cures for cancer, that they are not being given. Those were his big running on his platform. And he still has a website up from his 2016 campaign. But yeah.
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah. Pretty interesting stuff.
He still has till 2028, so maybe somebody will write him in.
Maybe so.
There you go.
Yeah.
Enzo says supposedly Tesla was trying to use his gear on Long Island to create an aurora over Greenland, and it overshot its target and created the Tunguska explosion. And that's what the video I was talking about was.
Yeah.
Talking about.
That's one of the theories on it. It's interesting. That's for a whole nother show.
No, anything with Tesla in it's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
The guy was a genius. He was a bit mad, but he was a genius nonetheless.
Mm-hmm. I can't find the thing. Somewhere I have info, and I got this huge pile of papers laying here. But he talked about the fact that they would send the kids into the future, into their own timelines, or they would send them into the future to pick up basically canisters of spools of, be like microfilm, of everything that was going to occur between the 70s and whatever year it was. I can't remember, but they would bring this back and then it would be watched in the lab so they could see what things would be coming up in the future. That's how they knew who would be running for president and where these kids would be in the future and things like that. So, and he also, he did go back to see George Washington, but he also, I don't think he went back to the Middle East. At some point, I read something that said he did go back to the Middle East, but I also read something that said he did not go back to the Middle East, but he was able to watch Jesus being crucified in the Middle East,
Yes,
and things like
I
that.
actually saw that.
Yeah.
He
So,
was talking about in an interview,
yes,
I believe.
which I thought that was pretty wild.
I think that was on the Conspiracy podcast or something like that. Can't remember.
Maybe. I'm trying to see. I think it's in the,
Maybe not.
I have too
I
many
need to
papers.
take better notes. I really do.
I had everything all
Yep.
nice
Change
and neat
Jess's
and
name to
organized, and then I
notebooks, so.
started whipping through it. So, but those are the big things I think that I had, because I
Yeah,
don't
me
know
too. I mean,
what it is.
if we push out any more further, we're going to have to go into some other deep dive areas, and it's too much information. Like
Mhm.
we could totally go, and like he supposedly did an entire project to Mars that involved the not yet President Obama being one of those people that were sent. That was a group of 10 young adults, I believe, that were trained to take time travel flights to Mars. They saw aliens and alien civilizations, and
Obama was asked
that's a
about
whole
that.
nother.
He was asked
Yes,
about
he was.
that. He did not particularly respond, but his office did, and they said that he had not been to Mars, but they at least acknowledged the fact that the question was asked, which is kind of fun.
Enzo, we should have named the show Down the Rabbit Hole.
For sure.
I mean, because I head down there every time we start it.
Well, I'm sitting here making a list of other subjects to start looking up. And I've got, 1, 2, 3, 4 more podcast ideas just off of this show.
Yeah. I mean,
Mhm.
it's fascinating. Like, the guy is absolutely fascinating.
He is.
I cannot get over how credible and reasonable he sounds. I mean, we're going to talk. He just gives that vibe. He's more trustworthy than any of the candidates I've seen in the last 10, 15 years. He just seems genuine.
He does. Enzo's asking the question, why did they use kids for all this time traveling? And I just jump in on this too. I think one of the reasons was the fact that children are far less likely to suffer bad effects from it, even mentally. The minds of a child is much more able to wrap itself around the idea, as opposed to what an
Their
adult
brains
would
are more
be able to.
flexible.
Yeah, they're more willing to say, okay, this is
Yeah.
happening. Okay, we can go with it. And they did not seem to suffer the physical difficulties. They did suffer physical difficulties later in life, but not near what the adults that were in the program seemed to.
Yeah. That he said, of course, they could take the stressors of the travel. They wanted to take them, or this is what Andrew Bajago had said. They took them young because they were impressionable and they were more apt to do what they were told. They were also in a training program that was supposed to last through so many years to get them to a point where they would be adult time travelers that had all this prior knowledge to them and had done all these different types of jumps. So they knew what they were doing. They were just being
Groomed.
worked through the system. They were being groomed to be through this. And kids are just better at things. I would think, I mean, they were sending them to all of these like historical moments in time
They can blend in
who's
well.
gonna think they can blend in, who's going to be accusatory to a child? If you see an older man there that looks out of place, the first thing you're going to think is, oh, it's like a spy, or what's that guy doing here? But if you see a kid running around, even one that's a little oddly dressed, kids do dress odd.
What a weird little guy.
It doesn't matter what
Especially
period of time
in
you're from,
1800s,
kids are silly.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're likely, and even if they do think the kid is weird and out of place, what
Non-threatening.
are they going to do? They're not going to arrest them. They're going to say, "Hey, get out of here, kid."
Yeah.
So
Get away from me, kid.
I
You
think
bother
all in all-
me.
Children are seen as much more
Yeah.
non-threatening than the adults would be, for sure.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I would look at
and
a
they
kid
raise
and
them how they want them.
yeah, I
Oh,
would.
what a nice imagination you have, young man. I can see it. I can see the government doing that because they've been historically not shown a lot of care for the health and well-being of the citizens of this grand United States.
Yes.
At least not when it, doesn't suit them.
Yeah.
We're talking about the people who shelled San Francisco with biological material just to see how many people got sick. I mean,
Yeah.
they're great.
It's crazy.
So, well, that's about
Yeah,
all I've got.
Yeah, like I said, we have to stop at this one, because if we go one or two steps further, we're going to be in whole other shows. So, because this touches on time travel and Montauk and the Philadelphia experiment. It touches on Nikola Tesla. Oh my gosh, we could go like,
let's just do a Tesla show sometime. That would be a good one.
Yeah, we can do that again. We've done a Tesla show back the first year.
I'm super excited.
I mean, that was
just
when we
found
really
that
sucked.
paragraph I was looking for.
Now we just suck a
she
little.
found her paragraph.
I found
Yay.
the paragraph. It says that they were sent to the year 2045 to receive small canisters of microfilm summaries of events that occurred between 1972 and 1945. He went into a building that was made of emerald and tungsten steel. There were no cars, no pollution, and everything was like a garden state. It was like the earth was beautiful. It was a very pleasant place to be. And he received these small canisters of microfilm and brought them back to the lab. So interesting.
I mean, we're using synthetic jewels now for windows and cell phone screens. Why not buildings?
It'd be a big emerald. But
I mean,
tungsten steel, you could incorporate it into it, and that would be super, super strong.
Be a little bit brittle. You'd have to manage the tungsten.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a metallurgist. I'm not going to go there.
And maybe by the year 2045, they did,
Yeah, exactly.
But that's only, what is this, 2023? That's not that many years into the future.
That's 22 years.
Yeah.
Look how far we've come in the last 22 years.
Yeah, since 2000, yeah. 2001.
Yeah. I mean, technology has grown by leaps and bounds, and it just continues to grow.
Mm-hmm.
So,
that's
all right, folks.
Enzo said they had microfiche in the future. I know, right? I guess maybe they put it on something that could be used in the 70s.
That would be my assumption, is that they knew that they were going to come asking for this, so they prepared something that would be readable in the proper time period.
Yeah.
If you were coming back to today, they would have given you a CD or a flash drive.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
well, now,
time travel.
Did they say that it was microfilm in those canisters?
Yes, they did.
Okay. Because I was going to say, like, they could have sent back a DVD player or a CD player or whatever, and those canisters could have been full of.
It says small canisters of microfilm summaries of events.
That's what I would have done, is put it in a medium that they could easily access.
That would be, yeah.
It's not like they lost the ability to make microfilm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
True.
So, all right. Well, with that, I'm done. Are you girls done?
I think so.
Do you wanna plug Paranormal Presents before we head off? Because we won't do another show with them until it's So if you're in the Caney, Kansas area or surrounding areas, we've been doing this Paranormal Presents every first Friday of the month at the local Caney library here. And this coming, is it next week? Yeah, next Friday?
Next Friday.
Not this Friday, but next Friday. It's the I can't remember what the date is.
May 5th.
May 5th. We're doing Paranormal Presents UFOs in the 37th Parallel, and we're going to have a special guest with us, Enzo, if he's still on here. We're excited to have you.
Plug your upcoming podcast.
Yes, we have a podcast coming up tomorrow night, actually, and I believe, hang on just a second, because Adrian just said earlier who was going to be on it. Back it up here. He will be interviewing Wayne Inman from the Arkansas Ghost Hunters at Crawford County in Van Buren, Arkansas. He and his team do ghost walks in Van Buren, and they do hunts at a local hospital there. So should be interesting. And hopefully, I need to I actually won't bring it up. I'll have to confirm that later.
Paranormal Presents will be from 6 to 7:30 at the Caney City Library. And if you want more info on it, get up onto the SEK Bordertown Paranormal Society page on Facebook, and all the information gets thrown up on there. It's a whole lot of fun. Everybody shows up and we just have a blast talking about different topics. So, and we're excited to have Enzo this time.
It's been great since we've done it. And then Bordertown.org is going to be occurring the third Saturday of May. So that'll be fun too. I think we're going to work. Are we going to work with dowsing rods? Is that what we were
we're going to work with equipment and dowsing rods. Bordertown.org is our open club meeting. We have an open club for everybody who's into paranormal, supernatural, weird mysteries, just about anything you can think of. It's a free meetup, and we just talk about all things weird.
And I guess I should say the name of my podcast that I'm on tomorrow night is a mug. Paranormal podcast. That would be a good thing to know. But AMOK. AMOK. We're live on YouTube tomorrow night at 7. So can't think of anything else.
Oh, that sounds good. All right. Well, with that, we will
mark your name.
I mean, it's accurate.
Swiss cheese.
I guess it should say Swiss cheese brain, but I mean, it's accurate.
Now we're gonna have to give Pam a nickname.
Oh no.
The Paminator.
The Paminator.
The Paminator.
No. Pam's good.
All right. Well, it's time to sign off and go to bed. You all have a good night, and we'll see you all next time on The Fringe.
Bye, everyone.